For 41 years, Roy Vance said the names of nearly everyone in Wheeler County out loud into a microphone at 6:40 in the morning. He read the births and the deaths. He read the school lunch menu and the price of feeder cattle, and the names of the men who had come home and the names of the ones who had not. He said the name of the woman who ran the seed store and the name of the boy who found her lost dog, and the name of every single child on the honor roll, one by one, slowly, because their grandmothers were listening. In all that time, he never once said his wife's name on the air. Iris knew this. She had counted it the way you count a small stone in your shoe. Not often, not bitterly, just every so often when the kitchen was quiet. And when the lawyer finished reading the will and folded his hands on the desk, she understood that her husband had left her a building stuffed floor to ceiling with other people's names, and nothing else at all. The lawyer's office was above the old bank on Depot Street, and it smelled like radiator dust. Iris sat in the good chair because she was the widow, and that was the chair widows got. Curtis sat with his boots planted and his cap on his knee. Charlene sat with her purse in her lap like a small dog she did not entirely trust. The house went to Curtis. The 240 acres north of the creek went to Curtis, with the machinery and the grain still in the bin. The certificates of deposit at the Farmers State Bank went to Charlene, and so did the pickup and the boat nobody had put in the water since the reservoir silted up. It was clean, and it was orderly, and it took 4 minutes. Then the lawyer turned a page and read the last provision, which said that to his wife, Iris Mabry Vance, Roy left the station building at 411 Depot Street, the tower parcel out on the section line, and everything inside them. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Charlene laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, which somehow made it worse. It was the laugh of a woman handed a joke she was not expecting and unable to help appreciating. She said the mice would have a nice home now. Curtis did not laugh. Curtis did the arithmetic out loud, which was his way of being kind. The special assessment on the Depot Street lot was $1,140 a year. The liability insurance on a 200-foot tower was another $2,100, and you could not let it lapse, because if a boy climbed it and fell, they would take everything you had. The roof over the back half of the building had been questionable since the ice storm. The building had been dark since 2011. There was no buyer for a dead radio station in a town of 940 people, and there had not been one for 11 years, and there was not going to be one now. He said it gently. He said it the way you tell an old woman her car will not pass inspection. And then he said the thing he had come to say, which was that he and Charlene would take the headache off her hands. They would pay the assessment and carry the insurance and see to the roof, and they would give her $6,000 for her trouble, and she would not have to think about it again. Iris looked at the papers on the desk. She had spent 22 years as the cook at Wheeler County Elementary, and she knew what a thing looked like when somebody wanted it and was pretending not to. She had watched second graders do it with the last chocolate milk. She said she would think about it. Charlene said there was nothing to think about. Charlene said, not unkindly, that Iris had been married to Roy for 31 years and had never once set foot in that building past the front office, and that she would not know a transmitter from a hot water heater, and that this was not an insult. It was just true. It was just true. Iris did not argue with it. She had come to Roy late, at 47, a widow already once by then, and she had come into a house with 2 grown children in it who had loved their own mother and had made room for Iris the way you make room on a crowded bench. Politely, with a small sigh. For 31 years she had cooked and cleaned and driven Roy to the eye doctor in Hutchinson and sat in the front office on Saturdays with the radio on low, and she had never gone past the heavy door with the red bulb over it, because Roy had a way of standing in front of that door that meant the room behind it was his. She signed nothing. She put her coat on and went down the stairs and stood on the sidewalk in the cold with her keys in her hand. And she looked across the street at the low brick building with the blank signboard over the door and the tall grass growing up around its foundation. And she thought, he left me the one thing in this county nobody would ever bother to steal. She was wrong about that. Within a month, 3 separate people would try. Curtis wanted the house by the 1st. He was not throwing her out, he explained, several times. In several ways. His boy was getting married in the fall, and the house was the family house, and it had always been understood. He said the word understood 4 times. He offered to help her find something in Hutchinson, an apartment, one of those places with the button you press if you fall. Iris said she had somewhere to go. She had said it before she knew it was true, the way you sometimes hear your own voice make a decision a half-second ahead of you. Then she drove down Depot Street and unlocked the front door of the station with the key off Roy's ring, and stood in the cold dark of the front office and understood that she had just told her stepson she was going to live in a dead radio station, and that she had meant it. The building was longer than it looked from the street. The front office had a counter and a swinging gate and a bank of steel filing cabinets and a window air conditioner that had been painted around rather than removed. Behind the counter was a hallway. Off the hallway was the studio with its heavy felt gasketed door and its dead red bulb, and a control room the size of a bathroom, and a bathroom the size of a closet, and at the back a room Roy had always called the shop, which had a slop sink and a hot plate and an army cot with a folded gray blanket on it, because in 41 years there had been a great many mornings when it was not worth. Driving home. She swept first. That was simply what her hands did. She swept the front office and carried out the sparrow's nest that had come down the vent, and she found a broom whose straw had gone stiff with old floor wax, and threw it away and used the good broom from the trunk of her car. She washed the front window with vinegar and newspaper the way her mother had, and the light came through gray and honest and showed her exactly how bad the rest of it was. She made a list. She had made a list every working morning for 22 years, on the back of the delivery slip, and she made one now on the back of a program log sheet she found in a drawer. Bleach. Mousetraps. Light bulbs. Contact paper. A fitted sheet. 2 rolls of paper towel and a good pair of rubber gloves. The first night she slept on the cot with her coat over the blanket and her purse underneath, and she lay listening to the building. It ticked. All old buildings tick, but this one ticked in a particular way. A slow ratcheting from the ceiling that turned out in the morning to be the roof vent turning in the wind. Under that was a low, steady hum she could not place for 2 days, until she followed it to a metal cabinet in the hallway and found one small transformer still on the line, still awake, still faithfully stepping the voltage down for equipment that had been dead 11 years. She left it on. She could not have said why. By the end of that first week, she had the shape of it. She boiled water on the hot plate for coffee and for washing. She kept her food in a cooler on the floor and her bread in a bread box she brought from the house, and she hung a curtain across the doorway of the shop on a length of clothesline. She scrubbed the slop sink with bleach until the porcelain came back a gray-white, and then kept it that way, because a clean sink is the thing that makes a room a kitchen. She taped a schedule to the wall beside the door. Monday floors, Tuesday windows, Wednesday cabinets, because that was how she had run a kitchen that fed 210 children on a $900 monthly order, and because a schedule on a wall is a way of telling a building who is in charge of it now. The place smelled like 3 things. Under everything was cigarette tar, 40 years of it, gone amber in the acoustic tile. Over that was hot dust, the particular sweet, scorched smell that lives in equipment full of vacuum tubes long after the power is off. And over that, faintly, was Roy, the pomade he used, the wintergreen he chewed, the wool of a coat still hanging on a hook behind the studio door, which she did not move for 11 days, and then moved, and then hung back. She learned the building the way she had once learned a kitchen. The third drawer of the filing cabinet stuck unless you lifted it. The hallway switch was mounted upside down. There was a cigarette burn in the acoustic tile above the studio chair in the exact shape of a comma. The studio door was 4 inches thick and closed, with a soft, heavy breath, like a jar sealing. And inside it, the silence was not like other silence. It pressed on her ears. It had weight. The first time she let that door shut behind her, she stood perfectly still for a full minute with her hand still on the knob. In the studio there was a console with 16 faders and a coating of dust like felt. There were 2 turntables with 12-inch platters and their tone arms wired down with twist ties. There was a microphone on a boom wrapped in a plastic grocery sack against the dust, and when she took the sack off, the mesh underneath was clean and bright, because Roy had wrapped it himself before he went home for the last time and had plainly expected to come back. And there were the logbooks. She found them in the control room in 3 courses along a shelf, bound in stiff gray board, 41 of them, 1 to a year, each lettered on the spine in her husband's small, square hand. She took down 1974 because it was nearest and opened it flat on the console and looked at a page ruled into columns, and the columns were full. Every line, every hour, time, program, source, and then a 4th column with no header at all in which Roy had written names. Rasmussen, Verlaw, obit read 652. Kittredge, Dean, Hospital, Hutchinson, Ochoa, Marisol, Spelling Bee, County, Bell Twins, born 4:10 a.m., 7 pounds and 6 pounds 9 ounces. She turned pages for an hour, standing up, still in her coat. Then she put the book back in its place, exactly in its place, and went and sat on the cot in the dark and cried for the first time since the funeral, and could not have said precisely what for. At the end of the hallway, past the shop, there was one more door. It was a plain door, painted the same institutional green as the walls, and at some point it had been fitted with a steel hasp and a padlock, and the padlock was the size of her fist, and had gone the deep brown of long rust. There was no keyhole visible from the hall, because the hasp had been mounted upside down, and the lock hung with its shackle turned in toward the jamb, which is a thing a person does when they want a lock to be difficult for someone in a hurry. Roy's key ring carried 11 keys. She had been through them twice by then, at the front door, at the transmitter shack, at the filing cabinets. 2 keys on that ring opened nothing she had found. She stood in front of the green door with the ring in her hand for a long time. It was a Tuesday, and the schedule on the wall said windows. She did the windows first. Then she went and got the ring. The second of the 2 unknown keys turned. The padlock came open with a gritty reluctance, and she had to work the shackle back and forth to free it, and when it dropped into her hand it was heavier than she expected, the way old iron always is. She lifted the hasp. She pushed the door. The room was long and narrow and windowless and cold, colder than the hall by 5 degrees, and it went back farther than the building had any business going. Her flashlight found a wall, and then another wall, and then she understood that what she was looking at was not walls. They were shelves. Built shelves, joined and doweled, running floor to ceiling down both sides of the room, and the shelves were not the depth of a book. They were the depth of something much larger, and they were divided every 16 inches by a vertical partition, so that the whole wall was a honeycomb of tall, narrow slots, and in every slot, standing on edge, packed shoulder to shoulder like plates in a rack, were records. Not the kind she knew. These were huge, 16 inches across, each one sleeved in heavy craft paper, gone the color of weak tea. And on the face of every sleeve, in grease pencil, in Roy's small square hand, somebody's name. She stood in the doorway, with the flashlight shaking a little, and read the ones nearest her without touching anything. Hoyt, Ochoa, Delacroix, Funeral, County 4H, second cutting. Neighbors at noon, Mrs. E. Prue Storm 561, reel 4. She counted the slots. Then she counted the discs in one slot and multiplied and got a number so large she did it again on the back of her hand with the grease pencil that was still lying on the shelf edge where he had left it. There were 1,912 of them. It took her a week to understand what she was looking at, and she only understood it because of Arlie Prue. Arlie was 81 and had been the station's engineer from 1963 until the day it went dark, and he lived out past the elevator in a house with a ham radio antenna in the yard. Iris drove out with a coffee cake, because you do not ask a man for something with your hands empty. Arlie came to the door in his shirt sleeves in 40-degree weather, looked at the cake, looked at her, and said he had wondered how long it would take her. He came the next morning in a truck with a toolbox in the bed. He walked the room with his hands behind his back like a man in a museum. He told her what she had. They were transcription discs, he said. Instantaneous discs, cut one at a time on a lathe, right there, in this building, as the sound was happening. 16 inches, 33 1/3 revolutions, 15 minutes to a side, and some of them cut from the outside in and some from the inside out, and you had to know which before you dropped a needle or you would hear nothing but noise and think the thing was blank. They were not pressed records, he said. There was no other copy. There had never been another copy. Each one was lacquer. A soft coat of nitrocellulose flowed over an aluminum plate, and if you looked at the edge of the older ones, you would see the aluminum shining through where the lacquer had shrunk back. He pulled one out with 2 flat hands, the way you take a hot pan out of an oven, and showed her the label and then the surface, and she saw a fine white bloom on it like the frost on a plum. That, he said, was the lacquer letting go of its oil. It came off with a soft brush and distilled water and a very gentle hand. Left alone for another 10 years, it would not. He found her the ones with the gray-green cores, 3 dozen of them, from 1942 to 1944. Glass, he said. The war took all the aluminum, so for 2 years they cut onto plate glass. Drop one, and it did not warp. It exploded. And he showed her the 2 things that mattered most, and he showed them almost in passing, because engineers save the important part for last without meaning to. The first was that the discs were stored standing on edge. Every one of them. Never stacked. Never laid flat. Each in its own slot with its own partition holding it upright. Roy had built those shelves himself in 1966 out of oak flooring salvaged from the school gymnasium, and he had built them that way on purpose, because a lacquer disc lying flat under the weight of its neighbors goes out of true and never comes back. The second was the shelf list. It was tacked to the inside of the door, 31 pages of it, typed and then annotated and then retyped, and it was a map of the room. Slot by slot. Date, program, running time, and names. And when she took it into the control room and laid it beside the logbooks, she saw that the numbers in the 4th unnamed column of the logs were not numbers at all. They were slot references. Every name Roy had ever spoken on the air had a line in a logbook, and a great many of those lines pointed at a shelf. He had not been keeping records of a radio station. He had been keeping an index of a county. Playing them was another matter. The turntables in the studio had 12-inch platters, which meant a 16-inch disc would hang over the edge and wobble like a plate on a stick. Arlie knew where the transcription table was, out in the transmitter shack on the section line, under a canvas tarp, under a decade of dust and one very indignant sparrow. It weighed 140 pounds, and they moved it on a furniture dolly with a great deal of language and one crushed thumb. They needed a stylus. Modern needles are ground fine for microgroove and would ride the bottom of these grooves and gouge them. Arlie went home and came back with a cigar box, and in the cigar box, wrapped individually in tissue, were 11 transcription styli, 2.5 thousandths of an inch across, which he had bought in 1978, because he had a feeling about supply. And they needed somebody who understood what a preamplifier was, because Arlie's hands shook now and his eyes were bad, and that was Roz Duffy. Roz was 26 and worked nights at the Sundown Market and recorded the county's 2 bands in her mother's garage. She came in a canvas jacket with a laptop under her arm, and when Iris opened the green door and put the flashlight on the honeycomb wall, Roz made a sound Iris had last heard from a child at a birthday party. It took the 3 of them 4 days to get a signal all the way from a needle to a speaker. The first disc they played, Iris chose without a system. She simply reached out and took the one that was in front of her hand, and it said Neighbors at Noon, 3:14:68, Mrs. E, Prue, and others. Arlie lowered the arm. There was a rush of surface noise like rain starting on a tin roof. And then a woman was talking in the room. She had a flat Kansas voice, and she was reading, carefully, from something she had written out. And what she was reading was her own news. Her sister had had the baby, a girl, and both were fine. The ladies' aid would meet Thursday, and there was no need to bring anything. Her husband's hand was healing, and the doctor said he would keep the finger. And she was sorry to say that their old dog, Pepper, had not come home, and if anybody had seen him, he was mostly brown. And he answered to his name, sometimes, if he felt like it. Arlie took his glasses off and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and said that was his mother. She had been dead 31 years. They played 4 more that day, a high school choir doing a Christmas program in a room with a bad heater you could hear knocking under the singing, a man reading the closing grain prices with the patient sing song of a man who has read them 9,000 times, a little girl, 7 or 8, sounding out the winning word at the county spelling bee and getting it, and the sound of a gymnasium coming apart. And then Roz found the one from May of 1961, the sleeve-marked Storm, Reel 4, and they should not have played it that late in the evening, but they did. It was Roy. He was 43 years old on that disc, and his voice was rough as a gravel road, and he was reading names. He had been on the air 9 hours by the point where Reel 4 began. The tornado had come through at 10 minutes past 6 in the evening, and it had taken the north edge of town and the Hoyt place and the Delacroix place and the grain elevator's east leg, and it had taken the telephone lines with it, so that for one entire night there was no way for anybody in Wheeler County to learn whether anybody else in Wheeler County was alive except one thing. So he read names. The found and the missing, over and over, in order, and then in a different order, so that a man listening in his truck out on a flooded road would not have to wait too long for the letter his own name started with. He read the names of the people who were at the school gym and safe. He read the names of the people who were at the hospital in Hutchinson. He read 4 names in a lower voice and did not say what they were, because everyone already knew, and it was not his to say first. At 2 a.m, a woman's voice comes on, close to the microphone, and asks whether he wants coffee. And he says not yet. Iris sat with her hands in her lap in the cold room and listened to her husband, 24 years before she ever met him, keep an entire county company in the dark. When it ended, Roz said the thing that had been standing in the corner all week. She said that a daytime station is not allowed to broadcast after sunset. Not now, not then. The signal carries too far at night and steps on other stations 3 states away. It is not a technicality you can talk your way out of. It is the one rule. Arlie said nothing for a while. Then he said that in June of 1961, the station had received a citation for it, and that Roy had framed the citation and hung it in the control room, and that in 1979, when a new owner might have been interested in tidy paperwork, Roy had taken it down and put it in a logbook instead, and Arlie did not know which one. That was the week Iris stopped sleeping much. She went at it the way she had gone at a school kitchen, inventory first. She bought a ream of paper and a box of pencils, and she went slot by slot, writing down what the sleeves said, checking it against Roy's shelf list, marking the ones that were bloomed, marking the ones that were cracked, marking the 4 slots that were empty and should not have been. She wore the rubber gloves. She learned to lift a disc with 2 flat hands, thumbs on the edge, never on the surface. She learned that the room needed to be cool and needed to be dry and was neither, and she bought a dehumidifier at the farm store and emptied it twice a day, and wrote the water level down each time on a sheet taped to the wall, because that is what you do. And in the 4th week, at the very back of the room, in the last slot of the bottom shelf on the north wall, she found 9 sleeves that did not have a name on them. They had a date. Nothing else. 1 date each, a year apart. And under each date, in grease pencil, a single capital letter. I. She assumed at first it was a filing code. Inventory, maybe. Incoming, she left them where they were for 2 days and cleaned around them and thought about them constantly. Then on a Sunday afternoon, alone with the rain coming down Depot Street and the dehumidifier ticking behind her, she carried the oldest of the 9 out to the transcription table and set it down and cued it up the way Arlie had taught her, and lowered the arm and heard the rain on tin rush of an empty groove. And then her husband said her name. He said it the way he said the honor roll, slowly and complete. Iris Mowbray Vance. And then the date, and then the fact that the transmitter had been off for 1 hour and 11 minutes, and that nobody in the world was hearing this but the needle. He had cut 9 discs, 1 a year, always on their anniversary, always after sign-off, alone in the building with the door sealed and the red bulb dark. They were not love letters. That was the strange, plain, devastating part. They were reports. He told her what the year had held. He told her the corn had gone in late and come out light. He told her that Curtis had been short with him in April and that he had probably deserved it. He told her that he had watched her feed 210 children a hot lunch on a budget that could not do it, and had never once heard her complain about the budget, only about the beans, and that he had thought about that a great deal. On one of them, he said that he had never learned how to say a thing to a person's face, only to a microphone, and that this was a defect in him and not in her. The last of the 9 was cut 11 days before he died. It was the only one of the 9 where his voice was not steady. He said that if she was hearing it, then she had opened the room, and that meant she had found the key on the ring and had not thrown it away, and that meant he had guessed right about her, which he had been doing for 31 years, mostly quietly. Then he told her what the room was. In February of 1953, the Wheeler County Courthouse burned. It burned at night in a cold snap when the pressure in the mains was low, and the vault held but the record room next to it did not, and the county lost the better part of its births and its deaths and its marriages from 1946 forward. There were no photocopies. There was no state duplicate for that class of record in that decade. There was a hole in the county's memory 10 years wide, and everybody who could have filled it was going to die eventually, and everybody knew it. That summer, the county clerk, a man named Lyle Trask, wrote a letter to the station. Roy read the letter aloud on the disc, slowly, so it could be transcribed, and then said he had put the original in the log for the year it was written, which was 1954, which was the second book on the shelf. The letter asked the station to do a plain thing. It asked that when the station read a birth, a death, a marriage, or a burial on the air, it should keep the log entry permanently, and where possible keep the recording, and hold them as a duplicate of the county's own record until such time as the county could rebuild what it had lost. It said the county commission had passed a resolution to that effect, number 54-9, and that a copy was enclosed. It thanked him in advance and apologized for the imposition, and said it would probably only be necessary for a few years. Roy had done it for 57. He said on the disc that he had never told his children because his children would have heard the word county and thought the word liability. He said he had never told Iris because he had meant to, and then had gotten used to not having told her. He said that the room had been a chore for the first 10 years and a habit for the next 20, and somewhere in there had turned into the only useful thing he had ever done. Then he said her name again and thanked her, and there was a click, and then the rain on the tin roof, and then nothing. Iris sat in the cold room for a long time. Then she went into the control room and pulled down the second book on the shelf and found the letter. Folded in thirds, brittle at the creases, on courthouse letterhead with a raised seal you could still feel with a thumb. Behind it, stapled, was a mimeographed sheet headed Resolution 54-9. She sat down on the floor of the hallway with her back against the wall and read them both 4 times. It was Roz who put the thing in front of other people, and she did it almost by accident. She had been transferring discs onto her laptop as a favor, 40 minutes at a time, and she cut a clip out of the March 1968 program. 40 seconds of a woman with a flat Kansas voice apologizing to the county about a lost brown dog named Pepper, and she put it up on the internet with 2 sentences under it saying where it came from. She did it on a Tuesday night at the store between customers. By Thursday, it had been listened to 200,000 times. By the following Wednesday, a woman from the State Historical Society was standing in the front office in a rain jacket, having driven 210 miles, holding a clipboard she never once looked at. Her name was Dr. Naomi Fenwick, and she was the Society's audio archivist, and she had been doing the job 19 years. And she told Iris later that she had gone into the green room expecting 60 discs in a heap on a garage floor, because that is what these calls always were. She stood in the doorway with the flashlight beam going down the honeycomb wall and did not say anything for close to a minute. Then she asked, in a careful voice, whether they were stored on edge. Iris said they were, and that her husband had built the shelves that way on purpose in 1966, and that she had a list on the door and a dehumidifier and a log of the water she poured out of it. Fenwick asked whether there was any kind of catalog. Iris took her into the control room and showed her 40 one-bound logbooks and 30 one-typed pages tacked to a door, and Fenwick sat down on the console stool without being invited and put her face in her hands. She explained it that afternoon, sitting at the front counter with a cup of Iris's coffee going cold beside her. Old radio audio survives, she said, but it survives in scraps. A box in a basement, 12 discs in an estate sale, almost none of it is a run. Almost none of it is a rural station, because rural stations threw the discs out the week they were done with them, or cut new programs onto the same blanks, or sold the aluminum during the war for 4 cents a pound. And essentially, none of it ever comes with a finding aid. What was on this shelf, she said, was 57 years of one county talking about itself, in order, indexed, in the hand of the man who recorded it. She said the word unprecedented once, and then apologized for using it. The technical assessment took 3 days and a colleague, a transfer engineer named Gil Marchetti, who drove up with a road case and a machine that could play 16 inches and read a groove with a light instead of a needle. He found what Arlie had found, and a little worse. 68 discs with palmitic bloom that needed cleaning within the year. 9 with the lacquer lifting at the edge, which is a countdown you cannot pause. 4 cracked. The 3 dozen glass bass discs from the war years were, ironically, in the best condition in the room, because glass does not care. He also found, in the 4th slot from the end of the south wall, a run of 9 discs from 1957 labeled Saturday Barn Dance, and put one on and stood up out of his chair after 11 seconds. It was a live band in the station's own studio on a Saturday night, and the girl singing was 17 years old and from 3 counties over, and her name was Della Ray Hoyt, and she would not make her first commercial record for another 6 years. There was no other known recording of her before 1963. There were 4 songs on that disc, and 2 of them she never recorded again at all. Marchetti said, with the flat delivery of a man who does not like talking about money, that a collector would pay a serious number for that one disc, and that Iris should not, under any circumstances, sell it. Fenwick's report ran to 22 pages. Iris read it in one sitting at the front counter with a pencil, the way she read anything. It recommended that the collection be kept whole. It recommended that it stay in Wheeler County if there was any way to make that work, because the town was the reason it existed. It noted the 1954 letter and Resolution 54-9 and stated, in the flat language of such documents, that the recordings and logs pertaining to vital events appeared to constitute a duplicate county record held on deposit, and that this was a question the county attorney would want to look at. It attached a preliminary preservation budget of $91,000 and a note that the Society's grant program had funded larger, and it recommended, in a separate paragraph that Iris read 3 times, that the county's genealogical society be given access as soon as practicable, because the logbooks appeared to cover, in continuous detail, exactly the years the courthouse fire had taken. Vernell Trask, the county clerk, was Lyle Trask's granddaughter. She came down on a Friday afternoon on her lunch hour, and Iris put the 1954 letter in front of her, and Vernell read her grandfather's signature, and then sat down on the swinging gate of the counter, which was not built for sitting, and did not seem to notice. There were, Vernell said, 206 people in the county with a hole where the beginning of their life was supposed to be, people who could not prove where they were born. People who had spent 40 years and a small fortune trying to establish a date of death for a father so an estate could close. There was a woman out on the West Road who had been trying since 1998 to prove she was her own mother's daughter. Iris walked her back to the control room and pulled the book for 1954 and turned it around on the console so the clerk could read the column with no header at the top of it. And there they were. In a dead man's small, square hand, line after line after line, with the time each one had gone out over the air, and a slot number telling you exactly where on the shelf you could go and hear it, said out loud. The newspaper in Hutchinson ran it on a Sunday, above the fold, with a photograph of Iris standing in the green room, with her hand on a shelf partition, and her face turned away from the camera, because she had not wanted her picture taken at all. Charlene called on Monday morning. She was warm. She had not been warm in 11 months. She said she had seen the paper, and that it was really something, and that she and Curtis had been talking, and that with all this attention, it was probably time the family sat down and got the estate squared away properly, since a few things had been handled loosely. Iris said she was not aware anything had been handled loosely. Charlene said the word contents. The letter from Bern Hatcher's office came 9 days later. It was 4 pages, and it was polite in the way a closing door is polite. It said that the specific devise in the will conveyed the station building at 4111 Depot Street, the tower parcel, and everything inside them, and that the phrase everything inside them, properly construed, referred to the fixtures, furnishings, and broadcast equipment of the station as a going concern. It said that the decedent's personal collection of recordings was tangible personal property of a distinct character, not contemplated by the devise, and therefore fell into the residuary estate which the will divided between Curtis Vance and Charlene Vance Kittredge. It said the family had no wish to be unreasonable and was prepared to leave Mrs. Vance in possession of the building. It attached, as an exhibit, a written offer from a private collector named Griff Sanderling for 31 specified discs at $40,000, contingent on delivery within 60 days. And it attached a second thing, which is when Iris understood what this had actually always been about. It was a copy of a ground lease. In 2011, when the station went dark, Roy had leased the top 40 feet of the tower and a fenced square of dirt at its base to a cellular carrier for 25 years at $1,400 a month with a 3% escalator. The notices went to the station's post office box. The payments went into an account at the Farmers State Bank that nobody had touched in 11 years. Curtis had gone to the bank as an heir and asked a question and been given an answer, and the answer was $196,000 sitting in a passbook account with the name of a dead radio station on it. The lawyer's letter did not mention the tower money in the same paragraph as the discs. It did not have to. The tower parcel was in the devise, plain as a fence post. But if the devise could be read narrowly enough to lose the discs, it could be read narrowly enough to lose other things, and a person who is losing pieces of an estate one at a time will usually settle before the third piece. Iris took the letter to the front counter and read it 4 times with a pencil, and then she wrote out on a sheet of paper, in order, what each side actually wanted. It was a habit from 22 years of ordering food for 210 children with a supplier who was always trying to send her the second-best beans. The family wanted the money and did not much care where it came from. She wanted the room to stay a room. The trouble was that she had $9,000 in the world, and Bernhatcher billed by the hour, and everybody involved knew it. They came for the discs on a Thursday. She was at the courthouse in Wheeler with Vernell Trask and a woman from the Genealogical Society, sitting at a folding table in the basement with the 1954 logbook open, matching the 4th column against a list of the 206. They had found 11 that morning. They had found a man's date of birth for him at 11:15, and he was 70 years old and standing right there, and had gone outside to the parking lot for a while. Roz called at 1:40. There was a stock trailer backed up to the loading door on the alley side of the station. The padlock on the green room was not the padlock that had been on the green room. Del Kittredge had brought a cordless grinder and a new lock, and the new lock was his, and there were 3 men from the storage business carrying discs out into the sun. Iris drove the 8 blocks and got out of the car and did not shout, because she had never in her life gotten anything by shouting. She looked in the trailer. They had stacked them flat. Of course they had. They had taken them out of the slots where they had stood upright since 1966 and laid them one on top of another, 40 and 50 to a pile, in a black stock trailer with the sun on the roof, and the temperature in that trailer was well over 100 degrees, and the bottom disc of a 50-disc stack is carrying about 80 pounds on a soft nitrocellulose surface that a fingernail can scar. She counted the stacks. 6, something near 300 discs. She told Del, in a level voice, exactly what he was doing to them in the technical terms Arlie had taught her, and she watched him decide not to believe her, because believing her would have cost him an afternoon. Then she went inside and called the sheriff's office, and then she called Naomi Fenwick, and then she called Vernell Trask at the courthouse and read her the resolution number, and then she went out and stood between the trailer and the loading door and did not move. Deputy Halsey came in 11 minutes. It was a civil matter, he said, and he was correct, and he said it apologetically. He said he could not tell anybody who owned what. What he could do was tell everybody to stop until a judge said otherwise, and he did that, and Del argued for a while about a lawyer's letter, and Halsey said a lawyer's letter is not an order, and made them put the 300 discs back in the building, though not in the slots, and told Iris to see a judge in the morning. She saw one in 6 days. Fenwick came, on her own time, and brought the 22-page report and a second document she had written in one night, which was an affidavit describing what stacking lacquer discs flat in a hot trailer does, with photographs of the 4 that were now delaminating and would never play again. Vernell Trask came with the county attorney and a certified copy of Resolution 54-9, and the county attorney told the court, without any particular drama, that the county's position was that the recordings and logs relating to vital events had been created and held pursuant to a resolution of the county commission, that they were a duplicate record of the county on deposit with a custodian, and that a record of the county could not be an asset of anybody's estate, could not be sold to a private collector in California, and could not be moved without the county's consent. Bern Hatcher argued the devise. He argued it well. He said the word contents 11 times. Judge Alma Reinhold asked one question that mattered. She asked Bern Hatcher to point to any evidence that the decedent had regarded the recordings as personal property rather than as station property. And Bern Hatcher, who was a careful man, said that the recordings bore the decedent's own handwriting on every sleeve, and were indexed in books the decedent kept in his own hand, and were locked in a room to which only the decedent had a key, and that a man does not do that with the office furniture. It was a good argument. It was the best argument in the room, and it was the one that lost it, because it required the court to look at the logbooks. Iris had brought 3. She had marked them with strips of paper cut from a grocery sack, because she did not own sticky notes. Asked whether she wished to be heard, she stood up and said she would rather read. She read 4 lines. The first was from November of 1963. Vance, Curtis Ray, born 3:20 a.m., 7 pounds 11. Raid 641, she said the slot number. The second was from August of 1966. Vance Charlene Ann, born 11:50 p.m., raid 641, she said the slot number. The third was from March of 1988. Vance Doreen Hoyt, funeral Thursday, Methodist family, asks memorials to the school lunch fund. Read 6:44, and again 12:10. She stopped there for a moment and told the court that the third one was the first wife, the mother of the 2 people at the other table, and that Roy had read her funeral notice twice in one day, which he did not do for anyone else in 57 years, and that this was in his own hand in a book he kept for the county. The 4th line she read was from that same March, 4 days later. It said only, Vance, R., did not open mic. Ran music. Prue read the obits. Then she closed the book and said that if a man's own handwriting was the test, then the handwriting said the room was never his to give away and never theirs to sell, and that she had not asked for it and did not particularly want it, but that she had it, and she intended to keep it standing on edge. She sat down. Charlene was crying and doing it silently and with fury, which is the way people cry when they have just been shown something true about their father by a woman they have spent 31 years calling an outsider. The court took 11 days. The order, when it came, was 6 pages and very dry. The court found that the devise of the building, the tower parcel, and everything inside them was not ambiguous, and that where a testator says everything, a court does not go looking for a smaller word. It found that the tower parcel and the account fed by its lease passed to the widow. Entire, it found. Separately, and more carefully, that those recordings and logs created and retained pursuant to Resolution 54-9 were a duplicate record of Wheeler County held on deposit, that no part of an estate had ever included them, that they could not be alienated to a private purchaser, and that the county's designated custodian was the person in lawful possession of the room in which they had been kept for 57 years, which was Iris. It also directed, in a short paragraph at the end that Naomi Fenwick later had framed, that the collection was not to be divided, stacked, transported, or stored, other than in accordance with the recommendations of the archivist's report on file. The Society's grant came through in the fall, $91,000, and then a second, smaller award the following spring when somebody at the state level read the finding aid and understood what it was. They put a proper split unit in the green room, 60 degrees and 35%, and Iris kept writing the numbers down on the sheet taped to the wall anyway, twice a day, because the machine could be wrong, and a person paying attention usually is not. Gil Marchetti's shop took the 68 bloomed discs first, then the 9 that were lifting, then the rest in order of urgency, 400 a year. Roz Duffy quit the night shift at the sundown market, and went on the grant payroll part-time as the transfer technician, and then full-time, and then took a certificate course in Kansas City with the society paying for the gas. Arlie Prue came in 3 mornings a week and sat in the control room and identified voices, which is a thing no machine on earth can do. He got through 1,100 discs before his eyes gave out entirely, and after that he still came, and listened, and told them who was talking. They did not sell the Delaray Hoyt disc. It went into the collection with everything else, and a label's archival division licensed 2 songs off it for a very correct fee. And the money went into the preservation account, and the county got a line in the notes on the back of a record album, which pleased Wheeler more than the money did. The Genealogical Society finished the 206 in 19 months. Vernell Trask issued the certificates herself. The woman on the West Road who had been trying since 1998 to prove that she was her own mother's daughter came in on a Tuesday and sat in the front office and listened to a man read her birth out loud at 6:41 in the morning in 1957, and afterward asked whether she could have the sleeve, and was told no, but that she could come back whenever she liked, which is a better answer, and she did, 4 times that year. That was the part Iris had not expected. People came, not many at a time. They came and sat on a folding chair in the front office with a set of headphones on and listened to a dead grandmother apologize about a lost dog, or to a father read the closing grain prices, or to a gymnasium come apart because a 7-year-old had spelled a word correctly. They came on their lunch hours. They cried in the front office and then washed their faces in the little bathroom and went back to work. Curtis came in March, alone, on a weekday, without calling. He stood in the front office with his cap in his hands and did not apologize, because he was not a man who could do that, and Iris did not require it. He asked whether she still had the book with his mother's name in it. She got it down. She turned it around on the counter the way she had turned it for the clerk. He read it standing up. Then he asked, and it took him a moment to get the question out, whether there was a recording of it. And she said there was, and she asked him whether he wanted to hear his father say his mother's name. He said not today. He said maybe in the fall. He came back in September, and again the following spring, and eventually he took to fixing things without being asked. The roof over the back half, the gutter on the alley side, the step at the loading door, and neither of them ever discussed it. And that is how it stayed. They put the transmitter on the air one more time. It took 9 months and a temporary authorization and a great deal of paperwork, and Arlie Prue supervising 2 young engineers from Wichita who had never seen a transmitter with tubes in it and behaved like men handling a saint's bones. They chose a Saturday in June. They chose 1 hour, from 6:40 in the evening until 7:40, which put the whole broadcast comfortably before sunset and inside the letter of the license, and Arlie remarked, without looking up, that Roy would have found that funny. Half the county listened in trucks and kitchens and on a portable radio set on the hood of a car in the elevator lot. They played 9 minutes of the Tornado Night. They played the choir and the spelling bee and Mrs. Prue and her brown dog. They played at the end 4 songs by a 17-year-old girl from 3 counties over, recorded on a Saturday night in that same room in 1957. And at 7:39, Iris Vance sat down in her husband's chair in front of the microphone he had wrapped in a grocery sack so it would be clean when he came back, and pulled the logbook toward her, and read the day's entry the way he had taught the county to expect it, the date, the program, the time. Then, she signed the 4th column, the one with no header at the top of it, the column where for 57 years a man had written down the names of people who mattered. She wrote, Vance, Iris Mabry. Read 7:39. Then, she switched off the microphone, and the red bulb over the door went dark, and the building went back to its ticking, and its one small transformer humming in the hallway, awake faithful, stepping the voltage down for whatever came next. The family had said the building was worth nothing. They were right about the building. The brick was tired, the roof leaked, the tower was a tax bill with guy wires. What they had never once thought to ask, in 11 years of driving past it, was what was standing on edge in the dark at the back of it, in 1,912 craft sleeves, each one with somebody's name on it in grease pencil. A man had spent 57 years making sure a county could prove it had lived. He never said so. He just kept the list, and locked the door, and left the key on the ring for the one person he trusted to open it. If your town kept a record like Roy's, whose voice would you want to hear again? And what would you want them to say? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe the things families throw away are usually the things worth keeping, subscribe and stay with me for the next one.